Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. Trevor Sikkema, Ollie Connolly here with you guys to do a handful of things on this Week 15 edition of In the Trenches. First, we're going to recap Monday Night Football. We got a little bit of a doubleheader, so we're double dipping here. We're talking about two games, recapping two games, one between the Bears and the Vikings, and the other between the Falcons and the Raiders. We're going to sort of break down how those results got to where they were at the end of the game, and then ultimately what they mean long-term. We're going to have some long-term discussions here. We're also going to hit a little bit of trench talk. We're going to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers run game and why it is so drastically different, in a great way for them, this season as compared to the last two. Ollie, how are we doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to getting into these games. They weren't exactly barn burners, I'd say. Maybe there was one good football team amongst the four that didn't also play their best football either, but I think there's fun medium-term and long-term discussion points to come out of them.
You know, I tweeted this last night. When did Monday Night Football become Thursday Night Football? When did we switch here? Because Thursday Night Football outside of, last week was tough because it was raining and it wasn't a great game. But generally, Thursday Night Football has actually been pretty sick this year. And Monday Night Football, I feel like we've had a handful of stinkers, and last night they were like, all right, we're going to give you two stinkers. And now, boy, did they deliver in the worst way, it felt like. I don't know. I don't know when this happened. Thursday Night Football, remember, it used to just be, I felt like every Thursday Night Football game used to be Jags-Titans in the powder blue and the mustard uniforms. When I think of Thursday Night Football, that is what I think of. Jags-Titans in the horrendous color rush uniforms. And instead now, we get the prime games on Thursday Night Football, and somehow Monday Night Football's got to catch up. I don't know what happened here, but I guess this is where we are. Vikings take the win over the Chicago Bears last night in the first of the two double headers that we had here. 30-12 was the final score. Vikings improved to 12-2, which obviously means a lot with the Detroit Lions losing this past week to the Buffalo Bills. The race for the one seed is on for three teams, really, in the Minnesota Vikings, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Detroit Lions. Tough game for the Chicago Bears. They've now lost 10 games. No, not 10 games in a row. This is 8 games in a row. They have now lost 8 games in a row. Sorry, I was getting my Monday Night Football losing streaks mixed up. We'll get to the team that's lost 10 in a row here in a little bit. But just overall, what's your thoughts on this game? Where do you want to start with the conversation of how it played out between the Vikings and the Bears?
I think we have to start with Caleb because I'm fascinated to know where you're at on kind of the spectrum of concern about Caleb, the player, and how you view him from prospect to pro, and where you kind of put on the continuum of it's all the situation, right? There's people out there who will argue, hey, the situation's been terrible. What a bad environment. We expected so much more with the receiving core, the investment in the O-line, bringing Shane Waldron in, and even seeing some slight improvements, right? When they dump Waldron and then Brown takes over running stuff, then they dump Eberflus and Brown gets even more control of the building as well. So I'm just interested, based on this game in particular, did it reveal anything to you about Caleb Williams that gives you more concern, or are you still in the camp that it's more about the environment?
I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't care about this season anymore for Caleb and the Bears. I don't think it means anything. I don't think, even if he has 3 terrible games through the next 3 games of the season, I don't really care. The situation is very clearly not good in Chicago. It was very clearly unstable before the season even began, because what were we, 3 games into the year, and they already had that private meeting with Shane Waldron where Caleb and some of the top wide receivers, came to Shane Waldron and they were like, hey buddy, throw the ball deep down the field. Let's call something here and try to win a football game. So clearly, if you're only 3-4 games into the season, whatever that was, and you felt the need to go do that, they move on from Shane Waldron not too far after that. They elevate Thomas Brown, and then they move on from Matt Eberflus, who you could have made the argument should have been gone last season. Now that I understand they wanted to give him a fair shot with a better, more talented quarterback. Okay, I understand that. And there was some improvement last year, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which is his expertise. So I can see both sides of the coin, but very clearly moving on from him when they did, there just wasn't a lot of faith, and there was a lot of instability throughout this entire rookie season for Caleb Williams. And the thing is, with Caleb, I think that we just as a larger draft society, we love to say, hey, guy needs a little bit of time to develop. It's going to be a little bit of time in the league before he really is able to get confident, be able to see the best of his abilities and really mitigate those risks and those weaknesses. The best version of his NFL self is going to be a couple of years down the road. And then when we don't see it in the first 9 games of his rookie year, we go, what is wrong with this player? How is this player so bad? How are things so different? Well, because we already said they were going to look so different. So to me, the worrisome part about Caleb Williams is a little bit like what we saw with Bryce Young last year. Now, it's not quite to that extent, and Caleb has more physical gifts than Bryce does to make up for it. But Bryce looked lost last year. He looked lost at the beginning of the season. It's why he was benched. Ultimately, right now, that's what I think about Caleb. He's hesitant. He's thinking way too much. You can see it. He's in the pocket, and he's like, okay, I should look here, but the defense did something that I wasn't really used to. This isn't really what I thought. This isn't really how I played or what I saw when I was at USC. It was much more wide open. And you can sometimes see with him, whether it's where he moves his feet, where he moves his shoulders, or sort of like sometimes what he does with the ball, you go, man, he is just so gun shy right now. He is so hesitant, and there are too many throws where there's a lot of hesitation. So the environment around him, I don't think helps. The offensive line, it's not the worst in the NFL. It didn't blossom the way that we wanted it to this year. I don't think the run game has been complimentary of him. And most importantly, he's just going to need time to see the field at NFL speed and NFL level against NFL defenses. That was always what it was going to take. And it's hard to even put this year into consideration, given how much chaos was there. When we talk about a guy learning at the NFL level, remember, we're not just talking about time. We're not just saying like, oh, okay, well, he's a couple of years he's a couple of games, a couple of years in the league, he should be good. If he's not in the right environment, he's not really going to improve. We've seen this with Trevor Lawrence, right? Trevor Lawrence is, 3-4 years in the league now at this point, and Lawrence has gotten better in ways, but he's not the prospect and the player that we all thought he was going to be when he went number 1 overall back in 2021. So, like, that is another example of it's not just time. It's the correct amount of time. And for me, this season can't end sooner for the Chicago Bears. We cannot get to another coaching staff, offensive coordinator, and somebody to help Caleb Williams fast enough. So last night, honestly, was more of the same of what I've seen over the last 8 games with them being 0-8 in their last 8 contests.
And that's what concerns me, is that it's more of the same, that there aren't any even subtle signs of growth. I think the thing that jumped out to me early in the season, I kind of got it from their point of view, is they threw the mother load at Caleb Williams. They were like, you're running an entire offense. You are going to be Peyton Manning and Patrick Mahomes wrapped into one. And on the basis of the evidence we got, it was a foolish plan, right? And I understood what they were trying to do. We're going to have time to develop this guy. There isn't a ton of pressure here. I know people want us to make the playoffs, but if we can show growth in his game and we can get to a point in 2 seasons where we have someone who's mentally equipped to win from the neck up in the pocket and then can do all the creativity and all the magic after the snap, that is an absolute home run situation, right? That is what's going to elevate him into being one of the 3, 4, 5 best quarterbacks in the league. And that was clearly just a car crash. What is frustrating to me now, as they've changed the offense, they've stripped out a lot of the work he has to do pre-snap. They've said, you need to speed everything up. That he's just not processing things quickly. Mm-hmm. Everything they do is slow. They get out of the huddle slow. They call the plays slow. His decision-making is really, really slow. And I just get concerned now where I'm seeing a guy who, even in college, when people were showing the highlight plays, right, of the moving around and running around, he still had a great understanding of throwing to leverage, of throwing with anticipation, of throwing accurately to the middle of the field. And just none of that so far is translating to the NFL. And with the anticipation stuff, you can easily say a lot of that stuff in the league is trust and timing, right? Sam Darnold was not a great anticipation thrower before he got to Minnesota. He's been a solid anticipation thrower this year. It's about throwing to a landmark, right? And having trust in your receiver, the depth of the route, the timing of the route, having trust in the offense that you really believe someone will be there and that you have the right answer built in depending on the coverage, the rotation, post snap, all that stuff. So you could just park that in the, it's a trust situation, it's the environment thing. The anticipation will come, and we've seen it in flashes earlier in the season, particularly when he played against Arizona early in the season. There was a couple of really nice anticipation throws. But to me, he's just playing so much see it, throw it football, which you just cannot get away with in the league, and then turning down throws. You can't play see it, throw it football, and then when you see it, you decide not to throw it. And when you just start looking at some of the average time to throws versus where he's targeting on the field, and you're getting 3.4, 3.5, 3.6 seconds consistently while hitting 60% short of the sticks, it's like, what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. Either the ball has to come out now, quick, and you're going to anticipate it, and you're going to throw short of the sticks and get some yak with DJ Moore and these guys, or you're holding onto the ball to try and challenge intermediate or deeper down the field. And it's just so out of whack right now. And I'm with you. It just seems so confused and so lost. And even when his eyes and feet get to the right place, he just won't let the ball go. And so I don't know if it's more in the Bryce camp, because Bryce to me was way more panicky and fidgety and was confused and a little bit intimidated about what was happening with rotations and big guys chasing him down. This seems way more lackadaisical and just like, he's not been able to pick himself up to the NFL speed. He always played at his own pace in college football, that he just cannot elevate now to what the speed of the league is.
Well, I think that this is a good discussion of sort of players overall, but it's magnified when it's the quarterback position. Confidence is often the most important thing, right? We see players all the time who, the most talented ones in the league play with the most confidence as well. And even some of the players who maybe they don't have all the talent in the world, maybe not the greatest physical gifts, but they're incredibly confident. I don't know why this player is the first one that came to my mind, but look at Kyren Williams, right? Kyren Williams isn't the biggest guy. He's not the strongest guy. He's not the fastest guy, but he plays unbelievably confident at all times. And he's one of the best backs, most efficient backs in the NFL because of it. And that's just one example of you have to be able to play with confidence. And the part about Caleb Williams that made him so phenomenal at USC and Oklahoma is confidence. Not only did he have the physical gifts, but he believed in himself. He believed that he was that dude. Like every single time the ball snapped, he knew that everybody in the stadium was there to watch him. He knew that all eyes were on him. He knew that he could be the Superman and give people a play that was going to be talked about not only for everybody that was there watching it, but on ESPN and on all these broadcasts and across the world and everything. And he played like that. He played like he was that type of a quarterback. It is very hard to have that sort of play style and think that it immediately shows up at the NFL level. The two quarterbacks over the last 2 seasons that have been unbelievably impressive at those two things is C.J. Stroud and Jaden Daniels. Both of those guys being able to hit the ground running. When we talk about what we're so impressed with these young quarterbacks, when they're able to stand out in their rookie seasons. To me, of course, pre-snap, post-snap evaluation, understanding NFL defenses, what you can get away with, what you can't, some of the big-time throws that you can layer in there. All of that stuff is obviously, talking points and things that are worth praising. But to me, it's truly the ability to, as a rookie quarterback, as a franchise quarterback, knowing that the world is on your shoulders. You worked your entire life to get to a level where you could be a high draft pick to the NFL, and now you're here. Now you're at the NFL level, and still just fully believing in yourself with no reservations. That is rare. And that is something that I knew was going to take time. With Bryce, it took him time to get his confidence back. I think we even see that with Richardson a little bit, right? I think we've seen that with Richardson. Now, obviously, he's still going through his inconsistencies. But to me, it was always going to take time with Caleb. Now, I was hoping that we'd see a little bit more flashes than what we have seen this season. I don't want to totally give him a pass and just let him off the hook completely. I was hoping that we'd see a little bit more from him. But it's hard to think that, certainly with all the voices that have been in his head in Chicago, and or I should say in his ears, with coaches or offensive coordinators or whoever it has been. And to me, Caleb just looks like somebody who needs a full offseason. He looks like somebody who just needs a full offseason with an offensive coordinator to have some sort of confidence in what he's going to have going into next season. So that is sort of where I'm at with Caleb Williams and the Bears. So now, in a grander conversation, I'll rope the Vikings in because I do want to talk about the Vikings here a little bit and just how legit they are as a number 1 seed. But that division's really damn good, right? We've got 2 teams that are competing for a 1 seed. We got 2 teams that have 12 wins. We got the Packers right on their heels. Chicago is so far in the rearview mirror you can't even see it. They're sitting there at 4-10. This is a team that was hoping that they were going to contend in a really good division, but certainly be in that conversation here with 3 weeks left in the season. They are not. Do you have, independent of Caleb, do you have less faith that this roster can compete if they get the right coach in there? Or do you still think, no, there's the right pieces here, and if you make the right hire, you could really see them be a lot more competitive next year if Caleb takes that next step?
Yeah, I think that you can turn things around really quickly. Look, if they were not arrogant enough to not get in the Jim Harbaugh business because everyone there was terrified about their own jobs, we could be having a different conversation right away, right? So we saw what Harbaugh did going straight into the Chargers. The roster I looked at went, that thing is creaking. Those guys are old. I don't think the young talent's really there. They've left them with a dump, and he turns it around in a flash and makes them competitive in a way I just didn't expect. And so I could certainly see someone coming in and having that kind of turnaround, but I just look around and go, okay, maybe there's someone out there Ben Johnson, whoever it is that people are linking to the gig, Mike Vrabel, who said, I thought Caleb Williams was a one-of-one type talent. I had him graded like Andrew Luck, and so I want to do anything I can to be in the Caleb Williams business. But you've also got to have Ben Johnson looking around going, I'm in this current building with the Lions. I don't want to go compete with that thing every single season for the next 4, 5, 6 years. That's going to be really difficult to do, let alone the other franchises hanging around there and what the Vikings and O'Connell have been able to do. Then you've got to deal with Green Bay and Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur. Like, it is a murderer's row to say I will step into that division just coach to coach. You got to go against Dan Campbell and Matt LaFleur every season and Kevin O'Connell. Like, that's just a really tough assignment. So someone I think is going to have to believe in Caleb Williams so much to get the right candidate in there. And I do worry. I just don't think they evaluate talent as well as we all expected they did. I think it's been more out now that Ryan Paul's record is just not as solid as it should have been given the ammunition they've had to do this. And maybe those guys in different systems with a different coach and a stronger environment could work out. But it's pretty clear to me the building is pretty rotten, right? One thing that stands out with Caleb that has been bothering me for a long time, and I wrote about this a few weeks back, is he gets crushed a lot and no one cares. And that to me is really poisonous in the building. When your offensive line, who is essentially blaming the quarterback for holding onto the ball too long, that's what's happening there, right? We can gather that. But to not be interested in helping him up. When they played the Patriots and he got dumped 9 times, no one cared about picking him up. So what can you do with that? Do you say, well, we think with a better coach, better O-line coach, better system, these players we've drafted, the resources we poured in can be better. Well, if there's a fracture there between those guys and the quarterback, and we're about building confidence in the most important person in the building, what do you even do with that? How are you able to move people on in order to protect the young quarterback? So I have, as many people have said, and as the reporting's been out there, my number one thing going into that job would be, I need to figure out what's going on upstairs. Who is running this show? Is it Warren? Is it Poles? Who's in charge here? Is there a way I can clear out the whole building if people want Ben Johnson badly enough? I think it needs a total top to bottom reset. But if I was just a pure offensive mind and I'm looking around at the landscape of the league and I can just see a talent who is right there, right for the taking, and I just walk into a job and not have to worry about the draft evaluation process, I would run over mountains to go and work with Caleb Williams. I think he's an unbelievable talent.
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk about Minnesota just, before we move on to the other Monday Night Football game. There's not too much to say about Minnesota that we haven't said already. I think Kevin O'Connell should be front runner for Coach of the Year. What Sam Darnold has been doing is perfect? No, but incredible, certainly, given his track record and just even in an independent state. I mean, he is a top 3 quarterback in terms of big-time throw percentage. I mean, he has been incredible this season. He's got a bevy of options to give the ball off to, whether it's Aaron Jones out of the backfield. Jordan Addison's been unbelievable. We all know what Justin Jefferson can do, and certainly with TJ Hawkinson back there, the offensive line is playing better, and I don't know many offensive lines in the NFL that could lose a guy like Christian Darrisaw and still be a really good unit. So Vikings just hat tip to them, and certainly what Brian Flores does on the defensive side of the football. Now, when I look at them in the number 1 overall seed race, Minnesota's got Seattle, Green Bay, Detroit, and then Detroit has Chicago, San Francisco, Minnesota, so a little bit easier for Detroit there. And then Philadelphia's got Washington, Dallas, and the Giants. So we think at a minimum, the Eagles and the Lions are going 2-1 down the stretch. The Vikings are the ones with the tougher test. They're at Seattle this upcoming week, and then it's versus Green Bay, and then it is at Detroit to end the season, potentially with the number 1 seed on the line. So Minnesota does have that tougher schedule of those 3 teams. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I still think they're right there in that race. And Ollie, this is a team that can make a Super Bowl run. I really do feel that way about Minnesota.
They have that magic feeling, right? It feels a little bit like Foles and the Eagles that season, where you've got this maniacal defense that's just doing all kinds of crazy, wacky things. They actually weren't that unorthodox last night compared to, when Flores goes true psycho and rolls out all the fun stuff, and Caleb Williams still struggled with it. But what last night I thought was important was, as you mentioned, Darnold for the last month has been like unbelievable, right? He's been playing at the highest possible level. He hasn't been protected so cleanly. You mentioned losing Darrisaw, and the way they've been able to just roll Robinson in there has been impressive, but it's not like it's been at the exact same level, right? He's been under a bunch of fire and has just delivered huge shots under pressure. So I thought last night was important because they got a average to sloppy Sam Darnold game, right? Where he made some impressive throws. He kind of hit what was open. And then he had a couple of disaster plays where he made poor decisions or was trying to throw the ball away and got picked off. And they were able to overcome that and win comfortably and cruise through it just because of how solid they are defensively, how explosive they are defensively, and able to create turnovers. And they just have, to me, almost a classic playoff formula, which is you can create explosives on offense. You can engineer them because you have such a talented receiver. You can control the line of scrimmage in the run game. And then can you defensively, you're not going to be able to hold everyone under 25 points running through that NFC, right? It's just not going to happen. But are you chaotic enough? Are you talented enough to just create turnovers? Can you get 2-3 game-breaking plays either side of the half to flip a playoff game? And they, to me, just with the way that they run things and how talented those guys are, I think we lose that in the conversation, right? Because it's all about Flores and the system. Just how unbelievably talented they are up front now, and surviving Stephon Gilmore not even playing last night. So they, to me, just have a real classic recipe for going through the playoffs, and just the way the field is opening up for them. I still don't have complete faith in the Eagles offensively to just be efficient in the postseason and not kind of stub their toe and have turnovers. And then the Lions, with all the injuries just racking up, at some point the major Jenga block's going to go, whichever one it is. Is it Carlton Davis? Is it Montgomery? Is it someone else down the line? Is it McNeil? It just seems like it's lining up nicely for the Vikings. I think their expectation now should be, we will be in the NFC championship game with a chance in the second half to go and get to the Super Bowl. And we may not be the most talented team, but we have enough of a formula to be able to get there.
Yep, they absolutely have the reason to believe that they're going to get to that point. Falcons-Raiders. I want to review this game here. Falcons end up winning 15-9. I don't know. This is one of those games where you won, but it feels like you lost. It really does feel that way with the Falcons. They're 7-7 now. They're trying to keep pace with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because, as we talked about before, they've beaten the Bucs twice. So if they tie the Bucs in record when it's all said and done over these next 3 weeks, they will get into the playoffs. They will be the division winner here for the NFC South. But again, 15-9 is the final score here. The Raiders looked horrendous and still had a chance to win that football game. I mean, they throw a Hail Mary and they get the ball into the end zone. It bounces the right way. You could potentially lose that football game. The Falcons now on the season, minus 49 points when it comes to point differential and minus 5 in the touchdown category. And yet here they sit right at 500 at 7-7 and still have a chance to make the playoffs. Your thoughts overall about this game, and in particularly where the Falcons are, maybe starting by talking about their quarterback position.
Yeah, I'm not even sure making the playoffs would be good for them at this point. I know you want to go on national TV in the postseason, just get drilled by someone. I don't think that's going to help anyone out in the medium term. I mean, they're 7-7, but they haven't beat a team by more than one possession other than the Andy Dalton-led Panthers. So it's a fraudulent 500. And it just seems like it's tail spinning, not even slightly at this point. I mean, Kirk Cousins, the last month and a half, it's just been a disaster, right? It's all the concerns preseason have now come to pass, where it's like, what if there's a major physical decline we were not aware of? What if he's not properly recovered from the injury? Then what happens when we've given him that contract? We've drafted a guy in the first round. Do we have the cojones to do the Mike Tomlin and pull the plug in year one and have whatever happens in our building happen because of that, and whatever happens to our cap sheet because we got to find a way to get out of that because he's not going to be the backup quarterback for us for 2 seasons? And it's just become, it's at the point now where I just feel sad about it, because I'm one of the maybe few rare people who enjoys watching Kirk Cousins quarterback in the NFL. I enjoy him playing point guard from the pocket. It fires me up. I like the way he reads things out and rips it, and there's just no fizz on the ball anymore, and he can't move around, which corrupts their entire offensive structure. And then he can't evade pressure. So when there's pressure, as there was last night and as there has been for weeks now, he just has no mobility or ability to try and get out of it. He had only his second scramble attempt of the entire season last night, and everyone, I imagine at home, is wincing, being like, oh no, that looks really, really rough, watching him try to scamper away from pressure. So it's just, I think it's the worst case scenario for them right now.
Yeah, Cousins is in a tough spot. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'd go to Penix. I really would. Yep. I would go to Michael Penix here, and the reason why I would go to Penix goes back to the phrase, you don't want to step over $100 bills to pick up singles. And that's where I think they kind of are, because the only reason why you don't make the switch to Michael Penix is, one, if Penix look, I will give coaches benefit of the doubt, and I will understand that this could be a play, unless Penix looks terrible in practice. Like, cannot pick up the offense, cannot run a 2-minute drill, doesn't know how to get things organized, doesn't know how to communicate things with the offensive line. If he is, which I don't think would be the case, because that would be very strange of Michael Penix, who is a multi-year starter for 2 different programs and played at an extremely high level over the past 2 years at Washington. Like, I would be very shocked if that was the case with Penix. But if that is the case, then I can understand why you don't want to go to him. But outside of that, the only reason why you wouldn't make this change is probably optics at this point. Signing Kirk Cousins to a $150 million deal, knowing that you've got to give him $100 million guaranteed, and saying, no, we're because I got to imagine they went into this season fully committed, to saying we are giving Kirk Cousins at least this entire first season. And then he will go into next year as the starter. When I say next year, I mean 2025. And we'll see kind of what happens from there. If he doesn't look great in 2025, we can throw in Michael Penix and we'll be good to go. I think they looked at the Patrick Mahomes scenario, the Aaron Rodgers scenario, whichever scenario you want to point at where a successful quarterback has sat, and they said, we're setting that up. I think Arthur Blank was sick of it last year. Everything that has happened since they moved on from Matt Ryan, different quarterbacks in and out of that lineup, and it felt like the Falcons were an embarrassment at the quarterback situation. And Arthur Blank, who, successful businessman, has a good chunk of change, isn't afraid to spend the money, said, this will not happen to my franchise again. You go get Kirk Cousins, and let's draft the guy at some point in the draft. Now, did I think they were going to do that at number 8? No, maybe they didn't even believe they were going to do that at number 8, and they might have gotten to that point when it was all said and done, obviously taking Michael Penix there at that spot. But I think this was a vow to make sure that they set up the quarterback position correctly for the next, whatever it was, they hope 10 years. Cousins is clearly not going to be the guy next year. And that's what I keep coming back to. You are not going into 2025 starting Kirk Cousins. That's not happening. He's not going to be the week 1 starter for you for the Atlanta Falcons. Knowing that that is the case, why would you not give Penix 3 games to evaluate himself at NFL speed? Especially with 3 games that, matter down the stretch. Like, it's not like these are just total throwaway games. You now get to evaluate your quarterback of the future in games where they actually matter, where the results and the successes and consequences matter deeply for this team. And if they don't make the playoffs, okay, they don't make the playoffs. Look, their defense pretty much stinks anyways. It's taken to this point, they're playing a little bit better lately, but their defense has been an Achilles heel of this team, even independent of the Kirk Cousins situation. So all of this to say, if you know that Kirk Cousins is not your week 1 starter next season, don't step over $100 bills just to pick up singles. Don't start Kirk Cousins for these last 3 games because you think that you owe it to him or you spent all this money into it, whatever. Give Mike, I would argue that these 3 games for the rest of the season are more valuable to Michael Penix than even the money that you're going to pay Kirk Cousins now at this point. Just pay for that to be the case.
What is the upside? You make the playoffs and get boat raced. That's the upside. What is the point of that for anyone? And they should have made this decision. I was arguing they should have done this a couple of weeks ago. It was clear the arm was shot. And I understand if their logic, as you said, was, hey, we want to follow the Mahomes model. That's how you pitch it to ownership, right? And you get it signed off. Yeah, well, if Alex Smith's feet had gone and his arm had gone during that season, the Chiefs would have made a change. They weren't going to put out a terrible product that could not functionally move the ball or throw the ball on the field. They would have just gone to the young guy and said, we'll see what we've got. Let's give him a 6-game sprint, and then we can address it in the offseason. At least we'll have film. We'll be able to talk about it. Like, that is the point of getting that evaluation process and stealing a few weeks of evaluation. I mean, they've told us, and, by the time some people listen to this, they may have announced that they've made a change here. But they told us with their play calling last night exactly what they think of Kirk Cousins right now. They had 24 first and 10s last night. They ran the ball on 23 and 24 of those. And they've not been doing that all season. Typically, they're about 40% on throwing the ball on 1st and 10 this season. They told us they know our quarterback shot. The one time he threw a pass on 1st and 10 was the interception. One of the ugliest interceptions you'll ever see. An interception that is indicative of the physical attrition that's happened with him, that he can no longer move his feet and slingshot and torque his body to get to the throw mechanics he's used his entire career. And what's weird about him and what's happened with his arm strength this season as it's eroded is you'll go full quarters and it looks okay. And he'll hit some throws and you go, oh, okay, I guess maybe Kirk's feeling healthy this week. There's some things going on there. And then it'll just die off a cliff immediately. And so it's just really peculiar. And he's not found a way the way Tom Brady did, the way other quarterbacks have done, to overhaul their mechanics as they get older, to change how they drive and talk the ball. And it reminds me so much of both the Mannings, Philip Rivers, who did not change their throwing mechanics to generate velocity on the ball as they age, whereas a guy like Tom Brady completely reinvented his throwing mechanics because he knew he couldn't snap the same way through his hips and his lower half the way he could do when he was in his prime. And he would be able to say, I just need to be accurate on a lot of these throws, then I'll go back to my old school days when I really have to rip it. And it's really about getting RPMs on the ball. Cousins is still trying to throw the same way he always has done. He cannot move his feet properly. He's not aligned to his target. There's no fluidity to his movement. And it just means that the ball dies on him all the time. And to have a run of games where you have 13 turnovers to no touchdowns and to not think there should be a change there, the only thing I can think beyond the optics, beyond the money, beyond the idea of a grander plan, is they had a handshake agreement after they drafted Penix and they promised him. They said, look, it's your team for that first year, the way you said it, but it was said explicitly to him, right? Look, we know this is a bad look. We know it's frustrating for you. You just signed with us for 3 seasons, but we promise you the first year, and they don't want to go back on their word. But there just comes a point, right, where there's a professional pride thing here of like, there's other guys in the locker room. You got 52 other players who want to win, want to compete. They want to go get paid when it's the offseason if they're up, or they want to get an extension. And you're just putting everyone else at a demerit. You're impacting everyone else's livelihood if you put someone out there who cannot functionally play the position anymore.
Yeah, and I think that it's going to be, I don't know, like you said, like we're recording this episode in the morning on Tuesday, perhaps when it comes out, maybe there's an announcement of, maybe a change at quarterback. So I think that could be all possible. But you're right. I think that there was a handshake deal. I think there was a handshake deal with Cousins, and it's going to be really hard to get him to convince him to allow them to go back on the handshake deal, because Cousins knows that if he agrees to get benched, he is done. His NFL career is for all intents and purposes done. And clearly he's not ready for that to be the case. He came back and he signed a 3-year deal. He wanted to be able to play 3 years, I think, and I don't think he wants to admit that. So they're in a tricky situation. At least that's kind of what it feels like. On the Raiders side of things, speaking of Tom Brady playing quarterback, the Raiders are in obviously a tough spot. They're currently picking number 1 overall. Do you think it's locked in that they take a quarterback here, Ollie? Obviously, I know you haven't taken a deep dive into, Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders or any of these guys in the quarterback position, but it's hard to think that they would convince a Sam Darnold, a Justin Fields even, to come to the Raiders with their current situation. You're basically either trading for J.J. McCarthy if the Vikings bring back Sam Darnold, or you're drafting a quarterback. I don't know how you're convincing a quarterback to go to a promising quarterback to come to the Raiders at this point to start for this team.
You'd have to put so much investment in everything else, right? And so your actual investment in the quarterback to convince them to come is that, hey, we've signed all these other pieces for you, these more veteran pieces, or what you would consider talented pieces at the top of the market, that your investment goes from being whatever it is, 12 million, 50 million a year, to actually like 55, 60 million a year, because to convince the guy, you had to go sign all this talent, and they should not be in that business with where they're at in the rebuild, right? So yeah, I would be pretty surprised if you didn't take a quarterback, beyond the fact that, there may be some teams who just think that Travis Hunter is such an unbelievably special talent that, you're getting Deion Sanders who can help you out offensively. They're having a game-breaking corner is such a field tilter for you, and he's obviously such a marketable star too, and he maybe is just worthy by talent of being the number 1 overall pick, and teams may grade it out that way, that they just feel you cannot pass on, however they view it. Maybe they consider he's like a Randy Moss-esque talent, right, where he's just going to redefine what football is. They just feel like they can't pass on that, and I would understand that being someone's logic. But yeah, I would just be in the market for a quarterback as much as I think Travis Hunter is going to be a really special player in the NFL. It will matter for nothing if you're rolling a Desmond Ridder out there again to start for you for another season as the ball's thrown over Hunter's head and you're losing by 30. So I would just, be all in the market for whoever they think is the best quarterback. The interesting thing for me is who will be making the decision. Are they going to run back the same front office? Are they going to run back the same coaching staff? I got no idea. I enjoyed Louis Riddick last night, who I felt like, maybe this is unfair, I felt like he was lobbying for the job on TV, and I don't hate that. I think that's a good move. And they should listen to him. I think he's really, really intelligent, and someone should give him a job in a front office. So I liked his plan. He laid out a nice plan for the team. I was like, great, sign me up. I'd go do that.
Maybe we should be doing that on this show. Yeah. Maybe we're missing out. Maybe we're leaving meat on the bone. Maybe we should just start, lobbying for. Look, it worked for John Lynch, right? John Lynch just calls up the 49ers and they're just like, "Hey, John, what's up?" And he's like, "Hey, why don't I be GM?" And they're like, "Wow, I didn't think about that. All right, cool. Yeah, we can do that actually." I know there's more that went into it than that, but I always think about that story. Yeah, I mean, you look at the Raiders. It's just been a tough year for them overall, right? You go into the season, and even with moving on from Derek Carr, you thought things were going to be a little bit different. Of course, I don't think that Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, the quarterback combination there, was going to strike fear into anybody. But Devontae Adams basically demands a trade, 4 weeks into the season. Christian Wilkins has been hurt, your big-time free agency investment. Tyree Wilson has not developed the way that you've needed him to, although he has looked better, I think, over the last 6 games. Max Crosby's now out for the year. Brock Bowers looks great, but he looks like he is just a man alone out there. Their offensive line's actually in a decent spot, I believe. I think that they're going to be a pretty decent unit moving forward, and so I think that whoever's going to be quarterback for them at least is going to have a decent offensive line going into next season. But the secondary was a big-time letdown for me specifically. I thought this team was going to be pretty good. They were top 15 in a lot of secondary and cornerback metrics last year, and they really fell off in a lot of games this season. I think Merrick's been good, but the rest of the unit just has not been what they've needed to be. And so it just feels like there's been a little bit of a lack of development, some unfortunate things that have happened, and this team was sort of all in on one direction. And when it didn't work out with Derek Carr and you move on, it's like, man, the rug was kind of pulled out from underneath them. And not that it all happened overnight, but you felt like you were building your team in one direction, and then all of a sudden, man, you blew a tire, and now you're on the side of the road, and it's just you can't even move forward. And I think they can move it, over the next couple of months and certainly this offseason, but I think you're right. Who's going to be making those decisions is a big question to answer here, and that'll go a long way into, what quarterback is going to be under center for this team moving forward. But I think what's most important for the Raiders is having a quarterback to invest in. And obviously you want to pick the right one, but just getting one to invest in. And that's why I think that as much as I don't love the quarterbacks at the top of this draft, getting a guy that your franchise can believe in, I think is going to be really important for this group. So any other Falcons or Raiders thoughts before we move on here with either of these teams?
No, I'm very fired up to get to the book, so I think we should do that.
All right, let's do it. So the trench portion of this show, for the show in the trenches, we're going to focus on the Buccaneers running game, and it has been such an improved running game, really compared to the last 2 years in particular. When you look at just overall EPA per rush, in 2022, this was not a good football team. Negative 0.195 when it came to EPA per rush. And again, this is 2 years ago now. They were averaging 0.09 missed tackles forced per attempt. They weren't, not even 0.1. And just to give everybody reference out there, you kind of want to be around like 0.3, and they weren't even at 0.1. I mean, they had no creativity. They had no running backs to be able to make things happen for them when they got into space, and even getting into space was basically at a premium. 3.4 yards per carry in 2022, just 2.2 yards after contact. The next year in 2023, so last year, 3.4 yards per carry once again, and just a 2.5 yards after contact per attempt. The missed tackles force was a little bit better. It was a 0.71, but the EPA per play was basically around the same. It was negative. This year, completely different. 6.3 rush grade as a team in 2022, 67.2 in 2023, and this year it is an 84.6. It is one of the better rushing attacks in the NFL. The EPA per play, or EPA per rush, I should say, is a positive this year for the first time in a couple of seasons. Their missed tackles forced per attempt is all the way up to a 0.21, and when it comes to the yards per average metrics, it is a 5.2 yards per carry average and a 3.7 yards after attempt average. All of those numbers and all of those things to say, it is night and day different with how they are running the football. Ollie, how are they doing it up front? Talk to me about this rushing attack for the Buccaneers.
Yeah, and night and day different than even the first 2 weeks of the season when this thing remained a travesty. And me and John Ledger did one of our 5-hour podcasts breaking down wide zone for the people, being like, well, this thing looks pretty broken again. I cannot believe we're on year 3 of this thing, different coordinator, and it's still going. And I think it speaks so much to the players, the individual improvement, particularly if Barton at center as a rookie in the middle of the line. Cody Marks struggled to start the season, has played really well. Since then, Gadecki at right tackle, becoming an above average starter at right tackle, is a sentence I never thought I'd say out loud in there to the public, and yet here we are doing it. But I think Liam Cohen deserves so much credit. And during the offseason, I made the point that I thought going from Dave Canales to Liam Cohen was actually an upgrade. And Dave Canales may wind up being a better head coach than Liam Cohen may one day be. But I thought he was just a better offensive mind, better game planner, better play designer than Canales was. And I think it's been borne out in the sense of Cohen right now is reminding me of when McVay was in Washington, which is like this guy who's had all these ideas stored up in his head for years and years and years and years, has never been given the keys to run everything on his own, has always had like input and, hey, you're in charge of third downs, you're in charge of the run game. And now he's got a level with all the talent available to him, with a thumping offensive line, with 2 cool backs in the backfield to get as creative and wonky as he wants. And they open the season doing what all these guys from the McVay tree do, right, for the most part, outside of Sean himself, which is we are a wide zone, then boot offense. That's who we're going to be. And you only get better at wide zone if you rep it and rep it and rep it. And 2 weeks into the season, you're looking, oh, this thing is a mess. And it's not only one play is having an issue. Every single part of the operation was problematic. They couldn't snap the ball properly. Everyone was losing all the time on their own. The stuff rate was sky high. And then he steps back and says, I'm going to overhaul this thing immediately. We are going to become a gap scheme-based team where the wide zone is still there, still a feature, still a part of it, but we are going to be a man-based blocking unit, and then we're going to run gaps, and we're going to counter and wrap and pull, and I'm going to put my players in their best position to succeed. And that's what stands out to me is they do a lot of really cool little wrinkles in the run game to make blocking easier for their guys and to make sure that every player is in a role where they're maximizing their strengths and no one is left isolated in a bad spot because they've got one sinkhole there at left guard. But they've been able to work around that complementary by bringing an extra tight end in, bringing a fullback in essentially, adding extra linemen to the line of scrimmage too. So he's just overhauled the mechanics of what they do. And then they just crush people. It's one of the most fun. Pull up the film on a Monday and just watch a demolition happen at the line of scrimmage. They hit people unlike few other teams in the league. They just love to destroy people who are off balance or in bad position along the defensive line. Mark in particular crushes people. Gadecki crushes people. Them working doubles together is as much fun as you can have watching anyone do anything. They have a really nice thing when I was mentioning about fitting guys to their strength. Gadecki is pure, I crush someone so that I can turn you leverage-wise into Mark, who is the wrestler, who can then pull, twist, and contort them. So they've worked this together rather than it being a double the other way, right? Or where you just double and climb. They've built in all these little details and minutiae, which is Luke likes to step first and climb so he can hit someone. Mark likes to sink and twist. Let's just make that the focus of the run game. Let's make that the go-to double team, and we'll counter behind it so we got the timing and the sequencing correct. So there's just so many details in there beyond having the great players' worths, of course, that add up to this just transforming from, you mentioned the 2 seasons, even the opening 2 weeks of the year when it was a mess.
You know, I remember talking with John at the beginning of the year when they were still sort of figuring these things out. And I do think that people believe that, like, there is a difference between, you know, outside zone rushing and obviously between the tackles, more like man gap scheme stuff. But when they think about that, they think about that with the offensive line. They don't always think about it when it comes to running backs. And it felt like at the beginning of the season, they had Bucky running behind a lot of man and gap scheme stuff up the middle between the tackles. And they still wanted Rachaad White to be like more of this like outside zone type of runner. And so at the beginning of the year when Bucky was playing really well, obviously it has been proven that Bucky is just very, very talented, but it kind of came down to they were sort of giving Rachaad White these carries behind this offensive line scheme and this run scheme that it just was not to their strength. And now they have honed in more on their identity. It took them a while to sort of get to that point, even with Dave Canales. And I would even argue through that full season of him as an offensive coordinator, they never really got in their groove. Now, they're better up front than they were last year, so I think that goes into it too. But like you mentioned, Cohen was able to take a step back like while the season was going on and change things. And I think it has been to both running backs' preferences as well. And people just don't talk about that enough. Cody Mock specifically, I feel like is just absolutely kicking ass, man. I mean, you mentioned Luke Gadecki as somebody who has really played well on the right side at right tackle, but Tristan Wirfs, we know he's fantastic at left tackle, but what Cody Mock is doing on the right side of the line at right guard, he has really improved to be that impact run blocker and reliable pass blocker type of interior offensive lineman. Talk to me about Cody Mauch and how much of a difference it makes when you have, Graham Barton and Ben Bredeson. Like, obviously, Graham Barton's getting better. He's a rookie, but there's a big difference on an offensive line when you got 3 guys kicking ass as opposed to just 2, and you got the numbers on your side, and having one interior offensive lineman really help out those offensive tackles. I think Cody Mauch has been a big part of why this run game is as efficient as it has been this season.
Oh yeah, he's just relentless and explosive, and I really, for at least from the film, I not spoke to these defensive linemen. I think he actually strikes fear into some of these guys, because now when you watch the Chargers game, he is hitting people so outrageously hard. So then when they go to more of a wide zone scheme, and he's the backside guy, right? It's all about angles and cutoff points and playing more technique based and just being able to slam someone in the face, essentially. He's doing this thing where he's like doing a phase basketball block where it's just his back. He doesn't even touch people. He's just kind of screening people off with his back. He hits it 3 times in that game. And that to me is all about the details, again, with the staff to the players of what do we do best. Okay, Cody can just crush people. And there's times when they can essentially get to what works out being like a double team in a typical scheme for other sides, and it's just him one-on-one, because he can just bury everyone, and he can twist and contort people at the second level in ways few guys can do. And so when that fear is there, and that is your go-to running dynamic, when the wide zone becomes more of your change-up, people are on the back foot, prepared to absorb a blow from him, or trying to just sit down rather than firing off the ball, which then gives him the angle and the ability to step across someone and screen with his back, as opposed to where he was early in the season, where the wide zone and kicking and going is like the name of the game, and he was struggling and his hands were all over the place and he was allowing a ton of penetration to the backfield. So to me, it's just a wonderful example of, this is why when we're talking earlier about Caleb and these players, the system is just so important. And then can you get the minutiae and the details in there to elevate your individual players? And Cody Mauch moving into a different style of system looks like a different player playing to his strengths than he did in the first couple of weeks of the season in a system that wasn't really working to his advantage. And then you get the knock-on effect, as you mentioned, of just how clean he's been in pass pro, where when he plays in pass pro, he hits everything like he's playing in the run game. He just wants to punch everyone in the face. And having that with Gadecki, as you mentioned, on the left side, Bredeson's been a bit of a sinkhole for them. But we discuss this all the time on the show, right? You can cover up one pretty easily in the NFL. Everyone's really good. So you can do things through formation, protections. Obviously, having Wirfs on that side is a major help too. But you can do things just with the drop back and the set point of the quarterback and the launch point to cover up one issue. When it's 2, it's really hard. If it's 2 on the opposite sides of each other, it becomes a bit of a nightmare. If there's 3, we're in a world of trouble. We're in New York, and we're worrying if we're all going to get fired, essentially. So it's been all around. I think that the improvement has been so beyond belief from those first 2 weeks. And it's credit to everyone. I think Cohen deserves a ton of it, but it's the players too. It's always the players going out there and executing, and they've been asked to say, hey, this is what you're best at, deliver for us, and all of them are doing it.
Jason Light is somebody who absolutely believes that you got to build through the trenches. He's done a great job of doing that, certainly when they won the Super Bowl, bringing in a guy like Ryan Jensen, obviously drafting players like Alex Kappa and Ali Marpet and all of those players, certainly Tristan Wirfs as well. But, I mean, they got another guy on the roster. Obviously, Graham Barton is starting right now, but I know they like Elijah Klein as well as somebody who could potentially be a starter for them, maybe at that other guard spot. And Jason Light, he's always going to develop the trenches, as are we here on this show. Appreciate everybody watching and listening to this episode of the Into the Trenches show. Make sure you're following all of Ollie's great work over at the Read Optional Substack podcast. He also does the Audibles and Analytics podcast, like you said, with John Ledyard, where they break trench play down even further. We're going to take a little bit of time off for the holidays, but we will be back to recap everything that is happening in the NFL in the trenches in a couple of weeks. See you guys then.